The lights were blinding. Cameras rolled. Millions of people across the world watched in silence as U.S. President Donald Trump leaned forward toward Themic. His voice cut through the tense here. Frankly, putting someone like IBRAHIM Traoré in that seat is ridiculous. He's a total lightweight. The room went dead silent. Gasps rippled across the studio. An African journalist dropped her pen. A French ambassador froze mid-note. A moderator's mouth appended slightly, unsure what to do. But IBRAHIM Traoré didn't blink. He sat there upright, calm, unshaken. His eyes didn't flash with anger. They narrowed, not with rage, but with purpose, like a man who had heard worse and chosen not to lower himself. The camera zoomed in on his face, still poised, powerful. A storm was coming, but not the one he expected. And in homes across the world, people leaned closer to their screens, waiting to see how this young African leader would respond, waiting to see if he would crack. Hadn't. And that silence was louder than Trump's single quotes, "Sin salt. Captain." Tro slowly turned his head and looked straight at Trump. The room felt like it wasn't breathing, but Tro's voice. It was calm, soft, like still water, with strength beneath. "Mr. Trump," he began, "you called me a butt. I fought for my people while yo tweeted. I buried brothers while you played golf." The moderator froze. Journalists' fingers hovered above their keyboards. No. One moved. "I don't speak to impress." Traoré said, "I speak to defend the dignity of people who have suffered for centuries." Then came the silence again. Trump starred, mouth tight, eyes twitching. Tro didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult back. Instead, he placed both hands gently on the table and said, "You can insult me, but you cannot erase the truth. Africa is rising, and we will not ask permission to stand." A woman in that crowd wiped a tear. A Kenyan reporter whispered, "My God, that was a lion's roar in Lamb's voice." Across the world, millions felt something rise in their chests. No anger, pride. Something had shifted. But most powerful moment was still coming. The broadcast cut briefly to a montage of Traoré's journey. Footage the producers hadn't planned to show, but something told them the world needed to remember who he really was. A barefoot boy walking dusty roads in Kaya, Burkina Faso, carrying books under his arm. A teenage cadet saluting under the sun. His uniform too big, but his dreams even bigger. Then, clips of mass graves, villages burnt by extremists, mothers crying, children screaming. A voiceover. This is the man they called Moron. Back in the studio, the moderator turned to Traoré and asked carefully, "Do you want to respond further?" Tro looked at her, then at the camera, and he said nothing for 5 full seconds. Then softly, "I don't need to defend myself. I defend something far greater." The room exhaled like it had been holding its breath for an hour. Trump shuffled in his seat. For once, no one laughed at his smirk because they saw it now. Not just a soldier, not just a president, a survivor, a symbol, a storm wrapped in silence. And millions watching began to feel that lump in their throat. You could hear a pin drop in the studio. After Trump's insult, the camera zoomed in on Captain IBRAHIM Traoré. Millions watched closely, expecting him to lash out or walk away. But instead, Traoré leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on Trump, his voice calm, low, controlled. "In my village," he said, "we're taught that when someone throws mud at you, it's because you're already shining." Gasps echoed across the room. The insult was just returned, not with rage, but with wisdom. Trump leaned back, blinking fast. The moderators' eyes widened. Foreign diplomats looked at each other, unsure whether they had just witnessed a slap or a sermon. Then Traoré said softly, "Your words don't define me, but they define you." Boom! The internet exploded. Within minutes, the clip hit. Millions of views on X, TikTok, and YouTube. But what most people didn't see on camera was the African interpreter in the back wiping tears, or the old UN ambassador from Namibia, quietly standing up with Hishand over his heart. Because in that quiet reply, True didn't just defend himself. He offended every African child ever called less. In a quiet home in Ouagadougou, Mama Ellen Tro's mother sat in front of a flickering TV. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her wooden chair. She didn't speak English, but she didn't need to. She saw Trump's finger pointed. She saw the word flash on screen. And then she saw her son look straight into the camera with calm fire in his eyes. Tears welled in her eyes. Not because she was ashamed, but because she remembered the day little Ibrahim came home crying, age 9, after a French teacher told him, "You'll never be more than a farmer's boy." She remembered him punching the dirt, whispering, "One day I'll speak for all of us." Now, that same boy sat in front of world leaders, being insulted and responding like a king. She looked up at the wooden cross hanging above the TV and whispered, "You did it, my son? You really did it." In that moment, across Burkina Faso, churches, mosques, schools, everyone was watching and crying, because it wasn't just Traoré they saw. It was themselves, their struggle, their dignity finally publicly defended. And the world was just beginning to feel the weight off that moment. Across the ocean, in a small Harlem apartment, an old man in military fatigues leaned against the wall. His name was Jeremiah Boone, a 78-year-old Vietnam vet, African-American, fought for a country that never fully fought for him. When the broadcast played Trump's insult, he muttered under his breath, "Here we go again." But then he saw Traoré's face. Not angry, not scared, steady. And then their reply came, "Your words don't define me, but they define you." Jeremiah paused the TV, stared at the screen, and whispered, "Damn, that's a real man." He hadn't cried in years, but now his eyes burned because he saw in Traoré what he always wanted to be. Unshakable under fire, strong without shouting, brave without bullets. He picked up his phone and texted his grandson, "Watch this African leader." Hedges did what most men never could. That night, all across the world, from Harlem to Nairobi, Lagos to Chicago, men sat in silence, not because they were weak, but because they were finally watching someone strong enough to speak for them all. By nightfall, every major media outlet was in chaos. CNN broke it first. Trump kills Traoré, a global outrage erupts. Then BBC. Traoré's silence stunts the world. Then Al Jazeera, Leon, and even Fox News. The clip was playing on loop. In less than 6 hours. Traoré's calm reply had over 89 million views on social media. Not a single curse word, no yelling, just dignity and quiet strength. Journalists scrambled to cover the backlash. In Dar, university students filled the streets waving Burkina Faso flags. In Paris, African migrants held signs reading, "We are not morons." And in the U.S., even longtime critics of African leadership began tweeting, "Traoré showed what real power looks like." Meanwhile, Trump hadn't spoken since. Heckenseled 2 interviews. AIB's report he'd urged him to apologize, but he refused. And Traoré, he was quiet, focused, already back in his Geneva hotel room, writing something by hand. No aides, no advisors, just paper and a pen. But fewer didn't know that what he was writing would shake the summit even more than his silence did. And it would soon read on live air. Morning broke. Cameras swarmed the entrance to the Geneva summit. Protesters, diplomats, reporters, all buzzing with one question. Will Traoré speak again? Inside the hall was packed. Delegates from over 60 nations took their seats. Tension gripped the air. Then, without warning, Captain IBRAHIM Traoré walked calmly to the podium. Na speech prepared, no teleprompter. Hun folded a simple piece of lined paper, handwritten, raw, personal. This, he said, was a letter I wrote for myself last year. I never meant to read it, but maybe the world needs to hear it now. He began to read. If they laugh, stay steady. If they doubt you, walk forward. If they insult you, don't answer with noise. Answer with action. I was not born to please them. I was born to protect those who have no microphone. His voice never rose, but the weight of every word landed like thunder. You are not small because they say so. And I am not. I'm a soldier, and I care more than bullets. I carry the voice of me people. A woman in the back broke down in tears. This wasn't just politics anymore. It was redemption. Trey finished reading and looked up. Hadn't smile. He didn't bow. He simply folded the paper again, placed it on the podium, and said, I yield my time. Silence. Then out of nowhere, the South African delegate stood up. Then Kenya, then Haiti, then Chile, then France. One by one, representatives from every continent rose to their feet in complete silence. It wasn't applause. It was respect. Even the U.S. ambassador, clearly uncomfortable, stood after a long pause. The cameras captured everything. No music, no commentary, just the image of a young African soldier standing tall as the world finally stood with him. In the control rooms of major networks, anchors cried off camera. In living rooms from Accra to Atlanta, people wiped tears and whispered, This changes everything. The clip of the speech shattered records. Every African child who had been called stupid, backward, or less than finally had a hero who answered without shouting. That day, something shifted in global politics. Not because Asomioon won, but because one man chose not to fight like the rest. And Thewald realized that's what makes him different. The clip of Traoré's speech kept circulating, but buried under thousands of likes and retweets was one comment from a 13-year-old boy in a refugee camp in Chad. His name was No verified badge, no profile picture, just a message that read, Captain Tra, I live in a tent. I've never known peace. But when you spoke, I felt like you mattered. I cried so hard my older brother thought I was sick. Please don't stop talking. You speak for us. That comment went viral. It was picked up by The Guardian. CNN shared it. Eventide magazine printed it on their front page. And suddenly the narrative changed. This wasn't about a verbal jab anymore. It was about what Traoré represented. Hope for those who had known. Dignity for those forgotten. When Trey's team read the comment to him, he didn't speak for a full minute. And he said quietly, Find him. Hadn't mean his name. He meant the boy. The search began immediately. Base, for the first time in his life, True wasn't fighting for applause. He was fighting to show one child that had been heard. Back in Washington, D.C., the White House press room was in chaos. Reporters did an official statement from former President Trump, but he remained insolent until the unthinkable happened. At exactly 7:52 p.m., Trey's personal assistant walked into his Geneva hotel room and said, You've got a call from Donald Trump. Silence. For a moment, even Trey's steady hands paused. He walked to the phone, picked it up, and simply said, Captain Traoré. Trump's voice came through tense but controlled. I wasn't supposed to say that on live air, he began. I lost my temper. But I didn't expect all this. Traoré didn't reply. Trump continued, Look, I've dealt with presidents, generals, kings, but you didn't take the bait. You beat me without saying a word. Still, Traoré said nothing. Then Trump muttered, You made him look small, and I guess I deserve it. Finally, Traoré responded, This was never about you. It's about how Thewald sees us. And with that, He hung up respectfully, but firmly. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was Allison taught in silence. 3 days later, in the dry outskirts of Rachana refugee camp in Chad, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up. Children starred. Mothers stepped out of tents, shielding their eyes. And then from the last car, Captain IBRAHIM Traoré stepped into the dust. No cameras, no journalists. Just him and a worn-out photo of a boy named Yuf. He was led to a tent with torn fabric and an old UNICEF sticker on the side. Inside sat boy, skinny, barefoot, and stunned. Traoré knelt slowly, looked into his eyes, and said, "You made me cry, Yuf." The boy covered his face and began to weep, not from sadness, but disbelief. For the first time in his life, someone powerful had come for him, not to speak about him, but to speak with him. Traoré pulled something from his pocket, Asmal folded Burkinabe flag. He handed it to Yuf and whispered, "Keep the safe. One day you'll pass it to someone else who needs to remember their worth." It began to rain. No speeches, no press, just a boy, a flag, and a leader kneeling in the mud, showing the world what true power really looks like. Just when the media buzz began to cool, something unexpected surfaced. A young Burkinabe journalist named Fatima posted a photo on her ex-Twitter account. It showed a 15-year-old IBRAHIM Traoré standing barefoot outside a one-room school in western Burkina Faso holding a hand-drawn sign. "One day I will sit with the powerful and speak photos without shoes." The photo had never been seen before. No filters. No press, just a dusty boy, a dream and fire in his eyes. Within hours, the image went viral. It wasn't a political message. It was personal. Comment sections exploded with tears and admiration. He was born for this. This picture'll be in every classroom in Africa. From barefoot to a global voice. I'm crying. Even celebrities reposted it. Oprah, Trevor, Noah, Lupita Nyong'o. And then a school principal messaged Traoré's team. "We printed the photo and placed it in our hallway. Every child should see it." Traoré didn't comment, but the truth was he remembered the moment that photo was taken, because behind the smile, he had just buried someone, and fabric was about to surface again. Late that night, as his convoy returned from a private UN meeting, Captain Traoré asked the driver to stop by a small post office near Geneva. He quietly stepped out, walked inside, and opened a box under a false name. Inside was a worn envelope, the edges yellowed. By time, his mother had mailed it to him a year ago, saying, "I found this among your father's things." It was a letter. His father had written it before his death, but never sent it. Back at the hotel, Traoré sat alone and read it slowly. "My son, if you are reading this, it means you've grown into the man I always knew you'd be. They will try to humiliate you, but do not bend. Thewald was never kind to our kind. But remember, dignity is louder than anger. You were born to rise where others fall. Lead with your chest open, not your fist. And if they call you a fool, smile. Because the wise never shout. Tears slipped down Traoré's cheek silently. He folded the letter, pressed it to his chest, and whispered, "You were right, Papa." The final day of the summit arrived. Security was tight. Emotions were higher than ever. Traoré entered last, calm, collected. But behind his calm eyes, the storm of memories brewed. The barefoot photo, their fuggy child's message, his father's letter. The moderator gave him one last opportunity to speak. He stood slowly and took the mic. 3 days ago, I was called I said nothing because I wanted the world to feel what silence means for us, the Africans. A hush fell across the room. I do not ask for pity. I ask for perspective. We build our countries with sweet, not tweets. We don't have $1 billion campaigns. We have hope. He then reached into his coat and unfolded his father's letter, but hadn't read it aloud. He looked around the room and said, "This letter was written by a man who never left his village, but today the world hears his voice." He then whispered one word into the microphone. Enough. And stepped down. The room was frozen, but millions watching live wept. Because for the first time, the world saw that sometimes whispers hit harder than insults. Just as the summit seemed to close, an unexpected voice broke the silence. A well-known former U.S. senator, who had been quietly observing, stood up. His eyes locked with Tro's and he spoke. "I have watched this man's journey 4 years from his humble beginnings to this very moment. His courage and calm in the of provocation is unmatched." He turned to the crowd and said, "Calling him was not just an insult. It was a mistake that revealed more about the insulter than the insulted." The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement. The senator then addressed Trey directly. "You have shown the world what true leadership looks like. Patience, dignity, and the power to rise above hatred. For the first time, Trey allowed himself a small, grateful smile. It was a moment that made millions watching live feel hope. Maybe, just maybe, respect could begin to replace ridicule. The next day, news outlets exploded with headlines. Videos of Tro's calm reply circulated, these millions of shares pouring in. Yet beneath the spotlight, Traoré spent hours on the phone with families in Burkina Faso, people struggling through war and poverty. To him, their suffering was real, and the summit was a platform to fight for them. That night in his hotel room, he looked out over the city lights and thought about the path ahead. The weight of leadership was heavy, but his father's letter was still in his pocket. A reminder that dignity will always be his weapon. He whispered softly, "I am not I am the voice of those silenced." A tear slid down his cheek, not from sadness, but from the power of survival and responsibility. Weeks later, the world felt different. Young people everywhere posted photos of the barefoot boy, the letter, the summitments, symbols of resilience. And hope. Tro returned home, greeted not with crowds of politicians, but with children who saw in him a hero who didn't break under pressure. He knelt, looked into their eyes, and promised, "I will fight for you." For every child without a voice. As cameras flashed, he stood tall, not with arrogance, but quiet strength. The summit insult faded into history, replaced by a powerful lesson. True leadership is not in loud words or insults. It is in calm courage, steady conviction, and endless hope. If history moved you, if Traor's courage touched your heart, please hit that like button. It helps others find this story. Subscribe now to join a community that honors strength, hope, and real leadership. And drop a comment below. Tell me what part made you emotional. Who inspires you to stay calm when life gets tough? Your voice matters. Let's keep this conversation alive. Together rise.